would say. Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt on this day in 1942. And this was the executive order that created the mechanism by which Japanese Americans were forced from the West Coast and the lower third of Arizona, forced into prison camps that are euphemistically called internment camps, even though that's not what they were. There was no legal term for them because they were not legal. They were unconstitutional camps that imprisoned people without due process. And it disrupted lives, it destroyed people's economic hope, it had a lot of negative effects. And we're still living with those negative effects today. Japanese American families continue to be affected in many, many ways, and I believe that our guest, Dr. Saigo, is going to talk about that today. In 1988, some of the process of repairing and apologizing for that grave error started, or actually I guess it would be a major milestone in creating a pathway of apologies. President Reagan in 1988 signed the Civil Liberties Act apologizing for this unconstitutional act and creating funds for research, and it also created the possibility of having this day commemorated every single day across the country as the Day of Remembrance. Tomorrow, the state of California will continue to take this under consideration as they consider whether or not to apologize as a state to Japanese Americans who were wronged within the state and by state mechanisms. And so this is an ongoing story, which is the theme of Dr. Saigo's presentation today. Civil rights for all, and the importance of keeping this story alive. The relevance is continually important in our present lives. What happened before is not gone. It's not something that's just buried in the past or remembered as a past event. So here to talk with us today is Dr. Roy Saigo. He was born in Sacramento, California. When he was just a young child, his family was forced to leave their homes and go to Gila River, one of the 10 camps. And from there he went on. His father was able to farm after the war, and hopefully you'll talk about that as well. Yeah, maybe. And what I know about Dr. Saigo is how hard he worked growing up working on that farm, and his father gave him an option. You can either continue to work on a farm or you can go to school. And this morning on JPR he talked about the fact that that really motivated him to go to school and get an education. He continued on to get a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Biological Sciences from University of California, Davis. He went on to earn his PhD in Botany and Plant Pathology from Oregon State University, where he met his wife, Barbara. He became a faculty member at University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, and then he became a Dean of Natural Sciences at University of Northern Iowa in Cedar Falls. He continued to develop his administrative career. He and his wife moved to Hammond, Louisiana, where he became provost and vice president for academic and student affairs in Southeastern Louisiana University. Next, he became chancellor of Auburn University, Montgomery, Alabama. He then served as president of St. Cloud University in Minnesota, where he retired, but he wasn't going to stay retired for very long. He came to SOU, recruited out of retirement, and really turned this campus around from 2014 to 2016, came in at a critical moment when the economy was in a terrible state, and really did remarkable things to bring students back to campus, to turn enrollments around, to turn the finances of the university around, and is still remembered by faculty and staff on this campus as the person who knew their name. I just met a staff member this morning who said, "Oh, Roy Saigo knows my name, and I'm just somebody who works in an office." And that tells you a lot about Roy Saigo, his character and his commitment to doing good for the people who he works with beyond the obvious tasks at hand. And so I want to welcome him, but I also want to express some appreciation for him from the standpoint as director of the Honors College. I should tell you my name. My name is Dr. Sherston Lyon. I just joined the Honors College as the new director over the summer. And you're all here for something that I didn't put in the title, but this is a part of an ongoing series, What Matters. And this topic is something that matters deeply to me. Not to be self-serving, but I want to give you a gift, Roy, as an expression of appreciation. Dr. Roy Saigo has been a long-standing supporter of the Honors College. He has given his advice. He has supported the Honors College beyond financially, but as well as financially. And even better than a thank you card, I want to give you a copy of a book that I wrote about Japanese American internment with a note saying thank you very much for your years of service and for your inspiration.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Sherston. We're going to have a quiz now. It's been a wonderful time to be here at SOU, and I have my son who's a student here. He's videotaping, and I have my daughter who's a student here, and I also have a grandson who is going to school here. So we really got a lot of skin in this game. So we're proud to have them here, and we're proud to have all of you here. Generally, I speak to students, and from there, I have a kind of a uniform group. But today, we have faculty and some visitors and guests, Barbara's and mine, and honors students. But it all works together, because I'm going to ask you, and it's never too old to learn, all right? I'm going to ask you to do something very difficult. I want you to transform yourself this moment. I want you to go on this trip with me. And to do that, you're going to have to change what you look like. You're going to have to make yourself Asian looking. You're going to have to change your customs. You're going to have to change your language. You're going to have to change the kinds of food you eat. And then you're going to go on this trip with me. The times are also different. If we go back to the 1940s, we don't have television. We don't have smartphones. We don't have malls. We don't have as many airplanes to fly around. We don't have interstates. We do have communication, newspapers and radio. We don't have any smoothies or McDonald's. And so now you're starting to reach back to the 1940s. All right? Transform, guys. You gotta be with me. I'm going to move very quickly through some newspapers, and there's going to be a theme as you see. These are going to be difficult times, and you'll see that in the Hilo Tribune Herald, they anticipate that Japan will be attacking Pearl Harbor in the next week. The attack happens on December 7th, 1941. And you've seen these pictures before, every anniversary. But again, the starkness and the explosion of the initial beginning of a war. Here we have numerous newspapers covering the attack. And even from the Japan Times, the Japanese newspaper, English newspaper, has now reported on the attack. During war, or even previous to war, and you're going to find a transition, and even in cartoons, and I want you to notice this. You're going to see propaganda, and right now we're going through a political period, and you're seeing propaganda. But cartoons, newspapers, didn't have many TVs, radio, fiery kinds of images build an image after time within your mind, no matter who you are. It's important to develop patriotism. And some of the people here with gray hair remember the Victory Garden and how we scrimped and saved and had rations and things of this nature. But now you're going to start seeing a change in the kinds of cartoons that were being shown. The propaganda, you'll see even Hitler over there, and in front, even kind of a black person. And you're starting to see the cartoons become ghoulish. The next step is changing the perception of humans to a more ghoulish type of individual, and then a transition to animals. And what you're trying to do with propaganda is when you start to dehumanize people, what do? It makes it easier to kill people. Because, as you see here, now we're talking about hunting, right? Talking about how we could shoot, we could take trophies. And remember, during the extermination period in America of killing and taking souvenirs from Native Americans. Remember taking scalps and ears and different parts of the human body. So this progression over time and repeated enough, if you can lower the individuals to animal-like, they aren't human, and therefore it makes it easier to kill other human beings. And then, as Sherson said, we had the recognition that President Roosevelt had signed the proclamation, and that all people of Japanese ancestry or descent will be taken away. You have 10 days to leave your homes. You'll be labeled as Japs, the same pejorative as the N-word. You have no due process, and you will be removed. Okay? Get your mindset. You've been told today you can only leave in 10 days. How do you feel? Do you feel angry? Do you feel confused? Do you feel sad? Do you feel speechless? Do you feel powerless? Panic, hopelessness, despair? The next question is, this has been done, and you are of Japanese ancestry. So, if you have 10 days, what are you going to take? What are you going to pack? And what are you going to get rid of? And generally this time, if we have more time, I would talk about, as students and as people, if you would carry things, what's most precious to you? And you can't take contraband, right? You can't take computers, you can't take radios, you can't take cameras and stuff like that. And so for our family, we had to get rid of all of our tea sets and porcelain, and you can't take family albums, pictures, important papers, things that mean something to your family. And I remember recruiting students one day, and a parent was here, and they were from Vacaville. My parents were at Vacaville at that time. He says, as a kid, I used to walk around the creek, and I'd find all these pieces of porcelain. And I says, that's where our parents took all the dishes and everything, and important papers, and threw them down there, and threw gasoline, and flipped the lighter, and burned it all up. And students generally said, well, you know, you can sell it. Well, what are you going to sell? Your car? They can have it in 10 days. How about your furniture? How about your heirlooms? Basically, the war wiped out our history. Think about that. You can't take your photo albums. We don't have a picture of my parents, my grandparents, my cousins, homes, different places. So now the reality sets in. We were pulled out of schools. Many were in universities, med schools, farms, crops in the ground, and we had to deal with it. And people said, well, how did you deal with it? During this time, my parents, who didn't speak English, we used the term, shigatanai. Shigatanai means there's nothing you can do about it, so forget it and move on. The other term they would use is gambare, and that means tighten your belt and get on with it. Don't worry about the past. You can't do anything about it, so move on. So we were mostly all Americans. We were children, we were women, we were young people, and here we had to pack everything up and move out of our homes. The small little squares are temporary assembly centers, and the big, large red ones are the permanent 3 to 4 year concentration camps. And we went from near Sacramento, Vacaville area between San Francisco and Sacramento, and went way down to Gila River, Arizona on the lower side. Some went by bus, some went by train, some went by cars and trucks. Nobody knew where we were going, and on the train they had everybody pull down their curtains so you couldn't see out or people couldn't see in. And as you see the police there, many with guns, sometimes I wonder what the people were thinking, and you can understand why, with all that military, that you wouldn't have an uprising. Many of the assembly centers were quickly put together, and some of the more famous ones were racetracks, where you had a large fenced area, and you had lights, and you had bathrooms and bedrooms, which were the stalls. So, one night, you're home, you're in your cozy bed, and next night, you are in a horse stall, and you have a gunny sack full of hay that becomes your mattress. Before you had your own bathroom, and now you have to go into the stadium for your bathroom. You notice the people are dressed very nicely, not understanding where they were going or what they were going to see. The new life. So you see this man in the back, and I'm guessing he's thinking, you know, I had a business, or I had crops in the field, or I had a profession, and the next week or so, he's got nothing. His hope, his dreams, his purpose of living has been now all taken away. Manzanar is a famous location, and as you can see, they were pretty much built and situated like military barracks. Here is a bachelor with his room and his furnishings all hung up by cord rope. At the beginning, there were no furniture or things, and so the people in the camps put together scrap lumber from the barracks, and so we started putting together a community structure. Of course, schools were the first. They grew vegetables, they had games. Here in the Pima Indian Reservation were two camps. This is my brother and I. That little boy is me in front of the house. And then over here you got the radishes. They grew vegetables to augment the food. And then on the right there's a harvest that the people were trying to regain some of the culture of their homes. While there, it was interesting. We were visiting, Barbara and I, the Herbergers. The Herbergers had a department store in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and we were at their dinner at the hotel, and they said, "Oh, is this your first time you've been here?" And I said, "No, I was living next door." They created Scottsdale. And they said, "Oh, are you American Indian?" I says, "No, I was a guest of the American federal government." And see, even they did not know of these circumstances. Again, Gila River, this is a way the barracks was laid out. And then the one that I think the honors group had visited was Tule Lake, which is right on the north side of the California border, on the border. And Barbara and I visited Mendocca. I don't think we visited Tule Lake, and many of these places have gone into disrepair. This camp had about 10,000. The previous canal camp had about 5,000. They had basically 3,000 more than they should have, what it was planned for. You can imagine they almost citified a layout with so many barracks with 3 to 4 families per barrack. Again, another picture where they are whitewashed. I wanted you to see the walls and the double roofs, and they're celebrating some sort of harvest holiday. Again, as the year went on, tables, beds, cupboards were made. You'll see on the lower right, many of the families had mail order catalogs. Some of the older folks remember the Montgomery Ward catalogs, the Penny's catalogs, and all that. And that was a way they got to improve their living conditions. Again, being a kid was fun for them because they had so many friends. They could run around, and the parents were worried, grandparents were worried because they were losing control and didn't have as much discipline as they had when they were at home. interesting pictures. You know, we were loyal Americans. You were loyal Americans. You pledged the flag, you studied, you stayed out of trouble, and you got good grades, and yet you got taken away because you were not trusted. The areas were made over, they had yard plantings, goldfish ponds, they were all built, and we visited Tule Lake area. And it's interesting, when the camps all came to close, the acreage and the houses were not allowed to be sold to the people who built those places. So the Japanese Americans who lived there and built it were not allowed to bid on those properties. Kind of a curious turnaround. The African Americans and the Japanese Americans were allowed to form battalions during World War II, and initially they were to be support staff. And it's curious to me that with all this propaganda of hate, untrustworthiness, spies, fifth column, and yet the government came to a point where they must have felt insecure of fighting people and took both and made them into fighting units. The U.S. government made this Battalion 442. It was the most decorated battalion unit in the history of the American military. And it's curious even then that they awarded only one Medal of Honor. In 2000, they had a review of the history and the written up of the action, and they awarded 21 Medal of Honors. So even during combat, prejudice oversaw the awarding of heroes. The Lost Battalion were Texans, 200 Texans on a mountain. And you can read about this especially, where General Dahlquist, and we were in Minnesota, Dahlquist was the general, and he sent the 442 up almost a suicidal mission. And put yourself now into the Japanese American soldier. You're fighting there with the Germans and Italians because your family are behind barbed wire. Now, how are you fighting? Are you fighting for this country, or are you fighting to prove to the public that you're loyal? So there's another incentive for you to go beyond the call of duty and to get shot up. There are 200 Texans, and the 442 lost 800 men. And when the Japanese soldier ran over a bunker and the Texan saw him, he says, "I'll be goddamn, here's a Jap coming to save us." Dahlquist asked for a parade, and he got out and saw the soldiers, and he was really angry, and he says, "Where's the rest of the men? This is disrespectful." And the sergeant said, "Sir, that's all we have left." General Clark recognized the valor and extreme sacrifices by the 442, and he recognized that they had gone above and beyond their call of duty. He said that they displayed extraordinary valor and were awarded to their counterparts, but again, like I said, at that time, only one Medal of Honor. Newsy report, upbeat, talking about the Phoenix Republic and using the term evacuees, and as we look at ourselves, you all, evacuees are generally seen as people fleeing disasters, and such as earthquakes and war zones. So the terms should be called internees, detainees, or actually prisoners. In the meantime, as this soldier is showing his brother behind barbed wire his Purple Heart. Again, curious, as life continued for the internees, there were several legal challenges being made. In the 1940s, a few cases related to Japanese internment went to the U.S. Supreme Court. These were not cases of disloyalty or espionage, but mainly challenging the order of showing up and being incarcerated. Fred Korematsu deliberately challenged the constitutionality. He was arrested, tried, and convicted. His case went to the Supreme Court. Fred Korematsu lost his case by a ruling of 8-3, but the words of dissenting Justice Murphy were powerful. The exclusion of all persons of Japanese ancestry goes over the very brink of constitutional power and falls into the ugly abyss of racism. All residents of this nation must accordingly be treated at all times as entitled to all the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. Chief Justice Evan Hughes, I think, said at the same time things that should be reminded of what we are governed by. You may think that the Constitution is your security. It is nothing but a piece of paper. You may think that the statutes are your security. They are nothing but words in a book. It is nothing at all unless you have sound and uncorrupted public opinion to give life to your Constitution, to give vitality to your statutes, to make efficient your government machinery. It's amazing that we talk about the Constitution all the time, but unless you individually in this class will stand up to speak your mind and to speak to the truth, it means nothing. And then during the Obama presidency, he had a Solicitor General, Catiel, Asian Indian. Surprisingly, he dug up a report by the former Solicitor General, Fahey. Fahey hid the Ringo report from the Office of Naval Intelligence, which undermined the rationale behind the internment. Fahey went on to receive awards, receive wonderful jobs, and retired from the federal government with all the medals and kudos and benefits of government service. But don't you understand that he lied and destroyed the lives of not only the people around us, but also the people that were interned based upon lies, because he hid the report that said that there was no danger of any fifth column spying, espionage, or inside attacks by the people on the West Coast. Just think about the enormity of the responsibility of the Solicitor General of the United States lying to the Supreme Court in order to incarcerate families who are American citizens. Are we seeing something similar today as our government goes through some very difficult times? Is it time to really study and get involved and become part of the solution? When we were packed up and shipped off, I heard so many of my friends said, well, it was for your own protection because of the anger and discrimination. And, you know, we lost our freedom and nobody spoke up for us. And so now it is so important for us in this situation to, again, as students of all ages, to understand the enormity of what this country has done and can do again. As we all know, we all get educated to a certain degree, but that education, the learnings of so many years, is not in our DNA. It's not passed on. The capacity to learn is there, but the DNA of the previous generation to be passed on is not. And so I have spent my entire life working in public education because public education is the core and foundation for the future of democracy in this country. After the war, we all talk about, hey, you all got to get home. You all can go home now. Where's home? Where's home? We were thrown out of our home. We had to destroy all our furniture. We had to throw away all of our belongings. We had to get rid of our car. Where's home? Nobody wanted us. And I'll read some excerpts from another book. General DeWitt, who was in charge of the entire Northwest, told the House Naval Affairs Committee in 1943, a Jap is a Jap. They are a dangerous element, whether loyal or not. Think about the words. 1945, ex-governor of Oregon, Walter Pierce, said, we should never be satisfied until every last Jap has been run out of this United States and the Constitution changed so they could never get back. That's Oregon. The Sacramento Bee, editorship by V.S. McClatchy, the Japs will increase like rats if they are allowed to settle down and own land. See, we weren't allowed to buy land. He later testified to the U.S. Senate. Japs less assimilable and move dangerous. Earl Warren used to be the Attorney General in California, who later became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He said, we have methods to test Caucasian race for loyalty. We can't do that for the Japs. LA Times newspaper, a viper is nonetheless a viper wherever the egg is hatched. Hood River Legion, post number 22. Hood River Legion, military, right? They put up a plaque of all the men from Hood River who served in the World War II. and they had the names of 14 Nisei soldiers, 2 who had died overseas, 10 who had Purple Hearts. And they scrubbed them from the plaque. This became known by many newspapers, by Saturday Evening Post, and the national headquarters of the legions said, if you don't return those names back to the plaque, we're going to disown your post. So they replaced the names, but added a caveat, but we still feel the same. This is in Hood River. Hood River in 1945, a fellow named Shoemaker, a legionnaire, had a newspaper ad he bought and said, we don't want the Japs back here in Hood River. And he had the signatures of 500 residents. 2 weeks later, he got another 175. The local minister had a little fruit stand, and he ministered to this fairly large church. But nobody would buy from him anymore, so he had to close his business. Plus, people complained to his congregation, and so they had to move to the Willamette Valley to a much smaller church. And so when we look at situations like this, and we talk to the 500 people, why did you sign? And their answer was, gosh, if we didn't sign, we'd be ostracized. There is a price you pay when you stand up for minority issues. There is a price you pay when you protect somebody, when you know it's right. I can't tell you, and I wish I could, say you'll be aggrandized, you'll be clapped, you'll be put on a stage, you'll be recognized, they'll give you awards, they'll give you free dinners. But the truth of the matter in human beings is that generally the mean and bullying type people get what they want because most of you will sign your name because you're afraid of not being a part of the crowd. And I noticed here in the valley that we did a survey of the children in Phoenix and talent in various places. And many of the students had been badly bullied by the time they're in 3rd or 4th grade. And if we practice what I said to you earlier, if we practice like I asked you to, right? You're going to be like me, you're going to look like me, you're going to eat like me, you're going to talk like me, and your customs are going to be the same, and people are going to pick you out. Now I'm going to tell you how you can be the most successful person you can possibly be. The most successful. Not the richest. Okay? I want you to practice just like studying math, just like studying English, right? Like studying athletics, like studying languages. Practice this every day. Understand what the other person is thinking. Put your place in the other person's body and imagine what that individual is thinking and reacting. Try that on your parents. Try that on your friends. Mom, I understand this is what you're thinking. This is why you're deciding on this. But I want you to understand where I'm coming from. And you know what? If we all did this, we would not have bullying. We would not have bullies. And we would have such a more peaceful and compatible, respectful, democratic community. Would we not? Pretty simple. So, as we bring this to a conclusion, we need to make sure that the experiences that I'm sharing with you and the journey that you and I went on, just for a moment, but hopefully as you go back tonight, and I know you people do this, is to start thinking about, hey, what the heck did he say? How can I identify with those things? It's very difficult what he asked me to do. Times were different, customs were different, he looks different. But if you go through that whole caricature of the cartoons, you can see how hatred could be built so easily. And with all the videos and Facebooks and all of that, you know, if you're in education, how you can be manipulated to think a certain way. So that's why things have to be shared, and you need to be educated to understand what the truth really is. Thank you, guys. By the way, I see your puppy there, King Daniel, King Charles, and in my other speeches, there's a picture of the dog trying to jump up into the truck where people are being taken away. So what would you do with your animals, you know? So anyway, those are kinds of things that we forget. When I spoke to another group in the 7th grade, the one young lady asked me, what was your food like? Were you able to take toys? And you know, just wonderfully honest and direct questions, because she had gotten her head into where she was. And so she was trying to ask, wow, gee, I have a toy, I need to take it with. But most parents wouldn't allow you to take anything but the clothes that you wear and the things that you can need for your survival. All right, any questions? Comments, yes?
Were you all allowed to speak your native, like Japanese or Chinese languages in the camps?
Could you speak your own language in the camps, she asked? Could you speak Japanese in the camps?
Yeah, because the Issei, the ones who came from Japan, and they didn't speak English. My mother, who was born in the United States, but was raised in Japan, couldn't speak English. But many of the kids who had gone to school were English speaking, so that even created a more difficult time. Absolutely, good question, yeah. Yes, sir?
Are you aware, were there any communities that were like sanctuary communities where there was some resistance against the government to protect their Japanese neighbors?
Well, that sounds interesting. I've read such wonderful accounts of some of the families who had farms, and when they left, the neighbors took care of it, and when they came back, they returned to the farms. Those are wonderful stories, but I think they're very few, but I've never heard of that. One family, or numbers of families, went back east, and they were used as basically slave labor, living in chicken houses and barns. But that was better for them rather than being incarcerated. But that's a great question. No, I would think that would have been easier for my parents, because they all settled from the Osaka area in Japan, around the Vacaville area, but when they were all sent off to camp, they all went to different places, didn't go back. But that's a great idea. If there had been, I guess, more money and welcoming, that would have happened. Hood River, a friend of Yasue family, was written up in this book, and that's why I took some of the Hood River stuff. And they had been here way before World War II, and they made marginal land into productive land, and it was more, I believe, of a land grab economic situation rather than racial. And so they were trying to take away a lot of the land that had been rebuilt and built into pear and apple farms. And so I think a lot of the hate came from that. But one that bothered me the most was about the legions and taking the names off. And one young man came back and he says, I fought with these guys. You're making Hood River and me a laughing stock in this country. And he was so, a lot of that kind of came back and changed as people came back, yes. But good question, holy smoke. Thank you. Yes,
Hi. Another thing that,
this is my wife, Dr. Saigo.
hi. Another thing was the question about sanctuary cities. This all happened so fast and so covertly that there wasn't a tradition or an opportunity for citizen groups to really understand what was happening until it was already done. And in fact, I think most Americans outside the West Coast did not know it happened. And there are a lot of people who still hardly believe that it happened. Because I know I grew up in Oregon all my life, and I didn't know it happened. Most of us didn't. So, but it's a good lesson for the future, you know, to watch out.
Dr. Saigo, I have a question. You mentioned Tule Lake.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I first moved to this area, I was about the age of the students here. And I lived just on the other side of the California border, and I had a neighbor who talked about he both helped build the Tule Lake camp and also helped destroy it afterwards. And what I wonder about and have always been concerned about, you know, when I visited that site, and I don't remember seeing much of anything but bare desert out there. And I think that there was a real intention on the part of some people in government, whether it was California state or the federal government, to just erase the fact that you talked about that people outside of the West Coast didn't even know about it. I think it's vitally important that it stay alive, the story, and also maybe, you know, rebuild authentically a barracks so that, you know, when school groups visit, I mean, I visited there with school groups where I was, you know, a parent going with, but there was really nothing but a sign, is what I remember.
You know, there's a term or saying that goes, history is written by the victors. And Barb and I visited there, and it was a notorious camp because a lot of troublemakers were sent to Tule Lake. And as we visited, and I spoke to some of the folks who are troopers there, historical troopers, and then we visited the county park, and it's in Oregon, and they have one barrack that's left there. And so I was trying to find a way to help with the Rotary Club or the Honors Group or somebody, because it's deteriorating. It should be painted and a lot of things inside are falling. And we had gone to the Tule Lake, and some of your students saw that. The only thing standing there is the jail, with nothing beyond that. And Barbara saw some of the other ranches and things where it seemed that some of the barracks were taken and made into a shed or a barn or something of that nature. But the country, and especially in a location that's close to us, at least 2 or 3 barracks should be replaced. But as I looked into it, I've been pretty much told to stay out of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll have to see, but it's a great question, yes. Yes, sir.
Were the people in the camps, were they aware of what might have been happening to the Jews in Europe at the same time? And was there ever a palpable sense that that could happen here?
Again?
Were the people in the camp aware at that time what might have been happening to the Jews in Europe?
Yeah.
And was there ever a fear among the people interned here
It's
that the
interesting.
same thing could happen
Yes.
to them?
And again, my parents of that era
Right.
always kept things away from their kids. I don't remember them talking except, you know, and all of you know this, you know, having coffee in the kitchen and you're just waking up to go to school, and you can hear the parents, in Japanese by the way, whispering. And so we knew something was up, and I knew they were worried, but
How much fear?
they
you don't
would,
know.
and that's in the culture. And they, you know, and I would say, how did you feel about that? You know, and the Japanese, my parents' era, they blamed themselves.
I heard you say that on the radio this morning.
Instead of blaming the federal government or getting angry, they felt that if they were a little more Americanized, if they spoke more English, if they had dressed differently, if they had done whatever, become more a part of the community, maybe this would have helped. But then when I was reading this book on the Yesway family, he was a part of the Rotary, he was part of the downtown business, and because of his wealth, he was ostracized. And when they did a survey by the LA Times around 1945, 1 in 14 believed that the Japanese were okay. So 13 believed that they had spied, that they had done espionage, that they were signaling ships, they were doing all kinds of, so again, the massive amounts of propaganda really hurt. And I've said this before where, you know, this morning I was talking on the JPR, and I was speaking to a women's group in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and the spouse of the Board of Trustees member stood up in the middle of my speech and said, "What the hell? You were the enemy. What'd you expect?" And so again, you know, you gotta think about the hysteria, that we are easily identified, and that our language is different. And so it's easy to pick on that with the onslaught of your neighbors being shot, the bombing, the sneak attack, whatever. And so up against that kind of barrage of information, it's easy to understand how people of my age bracket have come to that conclusion. And especially when Fahey, the Solicitor General, hid stuff. And J. Edgar Hoover and others came out and said we had no evidence of any spying or any fifth column. And so all the information was positive. And yet, because the Fahey hid information, it created this whole circumstance. Good question, thank you. Yes?
I want to just add an interesting caveat to that, if you don't mind. In asking Japanese Americans when I did my oral history interviews the same question, because that's my frame of reference, is Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. Their frame of reference and their parents' frame of reference was not knowing about the Holocaust, but knowing what war is like. Before we've learned our lesson about how that's not how we treat civilian populations. And a lot of the Issei believe that in wartime, when you have no rights, you might be taken and killed. And so there were a fair number of Issei who believed when they were loaded onto trains and the curtains were drawn that they might be taken to their deaths. And so that was actually a palpable fear that nobody really knew, and particularly as families were divided, they didn't know if they'd ever see their loved ones again. But again, it's a different mindset because it's as it's happening instead of looking at the top.
Yes?
It's my understanding that there was a group of people that did try to help, and those were the Quakers, that they sent packages to the school children, and they did try to take care of some of the people's property when they were imprisoned. But I was gonna ask you if there's anything that we as students, young students, old students, can do to sort of offset the discrimination that immigrants are getting now, particularly Muslim immigrants and Muslim Americans. I know you've given us some good ideas, but if there was any specific recommendations to that.
One thing, when we were in Minnesota, we had Mexicans, Muslims, and I had that question in my mind because there's such difference in appearance and the way they dressed, and the other were the Hmongs. And I proposed, and I left, but when I was president, I would have liked to have seen international exchange. Not an expensive one that you have to go overseas and live at different places, but I felt that if you have 50 Muslim families in St. Cloud, that we should be able to get 50 families to invite that family over for dinner once a month and exchange dinners the other way. I think we are too isolated again, and we are too comfortable in the way that we deal with our own, but only when you are discomfort that you can learn. And so it's a great question. The cheapest and the most effective way is to find a Muslim family through your churches or through the university and vice versa, and make sure it's a match. And so if you would invite them first and then they invite you, I think that would do a lot to make a difference. Yes, Jay?
Given the current political climate, do you think history is repeating itself? Sorry, do you think history is repeating itself, and do you think it's going to happen again?
Well, I don't think so. I think right now, because of the people we have, that the hysteria isn't there yet. And you saw the cartoons and things. I've not seen that. I look at Facebook, and during the week you'll see cartoons and things. I've not seen that yet. And once it starts to multiply and see the intensity, and then to see the transition from humans to animals, then I think we have a worry, but we're not there yet, I think. Okay? We adjourn. That was great, thank you.
I just want to say thank you again for a very inspiring presentation. Thank you again for coming. Appreciate it. Take some cookies on the way out.